Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India, Historical, Social and Cultural Perspectives. So this module is going to be on Indian feminism and disability, and the lecture is going to be on the meaning of a gender. Right? So before I enter into the discussion, let me make 2 points clear to you. One, Indian feminism and disability I took up in the 9 weeks, right? In this module, which you see that I discuss first theorization of disability, look at the important concepts, then I look at the policies. So there's a journey that I took, and then I'm talking about Indian feminism and disability. Why is it so? Is because that those lectures will help you to understand Indian feminism and disability, which means to say that the concern of a women in relation to disability and what feminist has to say, what feminists they have to say about disability, what is their contribution, what they have said so far on people with disabilities, and why is it so that it is also concern of a feminism as well, right? You may say that feminism is separate, disability is separate. We'll talk about it. That's why this lecture is about Indian feminism and disability. That's the one thing that you need to keep in the mind. Second, the title, the lecture is on the meaning of a gender. Why I have kept it as the meaning of a gender? Obviously, in the end of this lecture, I will be touching upon disability and gender. But before that, I'm thinking of talking about what is gender per se, how to understand gender, how to think about gender, right? Because until and unless we know the nuances that is related to gender, see, I'm presuming that a lot of my audiences are new, fresh, beginners. So I'm taking all of you together. So if I go slow and if you think that I'm speaking slow and I have talking something which you already know, it does not, it only means that I'm also keeping in mind the students who are not exposed to this thinking, who are beginners in this field. So for them I'm talking about it. You got it? So that's a concern that I have. So now if you have recalled, if you have thought of, every time what I do not talk directly on disability because as I said, first we have to understand the other discourses. For example, the module is on Indian feminism and disability, but I will talk on Indian feminism later. Why? Because let's know first now what is the gender, what is the women has to do with this, why feminism I am trying to talk about, right? So then only you can relate it, you can understand it. And as I told you that I am taking up these lectures, which is not exhaustive in this particular field, but which are a guiding lens for you to engage with discourse. Let's say, for example, if you are interested in Indian feminism and disability, suppose your area is on feminism and disability. So I will just touch upon important sections of Indian feminism and disability, and I would suggest you what are the ways through which you can look upon, because if you have noticed in my lectures, I keep coming up with some questions. I raise some questions and I ask some questions to you, to myself, so that we can all contemplate upon. Whether we agree, disagree with each other, that's not important, but important is to think, important is to give a thought on these things, okay? So, keeping in this mind, this module is going to talk about mainly on gender and disability, right? Talking about the concerns of women, what are the problems they face, what are the intersectionalities we encounter when we are going to talk about women with disabilities, and what are the prejudices, biases that we have of people around women with disabilities, right? So keeping this in the context, I will be explaining to you all the important points one by one that cover up Indian feminism and disabilities, all right? So with this introduction, let me go to the slide number 1. So in the slide number 1, if you see that I'm talking about the concept of a gender, right? the concept of a gender that is fluid and complex, right? That is a fluid and complex, not just biological difference, but also the social, cultural, and personal dimensions that define individuals and their roles within society. Gender refers to the roles, behavior, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for people based on their perceived sex. It's not simply a binary of a male and female, but a spectrum that includes a wide range of identity, experience, and expressions. Gender as a socially constructed. Gender is often understood as a social construct, meaning that it is shaped by societal norms, expectations, historical context, rather than being strictly determined by biological differences. For example, while biological sex, male, female, or intersex, is generally assigned at birth, gender roles and expression can vary across cultures, societies, and time periods. So, what is considered a masculine or a feminine in one society may be perceived entirely differently in another. So, underscoring that gender is not fixed or universal, but culturally contingent. Look at this slide again, right? This is important slide. Like, gender is often understood as socially constructed, which means that it is shaped by societal norms, expectations, historical context, rather than being strictly determined by biological differences. So, for example, biological sex are male, female, intersex, which is generally assigned at birth. Gender role and expression can vary across cultures, societies, and time periods. What is considered a masculine or feminine in one society may be perceived entirely differently in another, underscoring that gender is not fixed or universal but culturally contingent. Let me explain this to you, simple way, right? It's a fluid concept, right? It's not static. What I mean by this, let me put it this way. We have a different cultures. Every culture speaks differently from its members of the society. Okay? So, in a particular culture, we have a particular kind of a people, and based on the expectations, they are forced to perform. We have discussed that, and later on they internalize this. Like later on, they internalize this, it becomes their own way of working, right? That is how they perform, that is how they behave. You got my point? So, these are the ways through which gender is constructed. For example, in India itself, if you see that there are a lot of communities which are extremely diverse, and you will see that role assigned to women in different societies are not the same as in other parts of countries. The women of Northeast in some communities are extremely, their performances, their behavior, their attitudes, their way of walking is not the same as we see in North India. However, there are certain communities in Kerala where the expectations are very different. That's why I'm saying it's a fluid and obviously complex. It's not universal that the women of one country, if you look at the women of one country and you start thinking about other countries of women in the same way. No, that's a wrong assumptions if you think so. It also evolves as the society changes, as the society moves forward. Their expectations also changes from the women, and then also they get new meaning, new dimensions, right? So for example, if you look at the women of 1960s, 1970s, and look at the women of 2024, 2020, you will see the huge difference, right? In some part of countries of the women, if you see that at that point of time, they had very limited role. Limited role means only limited to the house and doing the kitchen work and all that. But later on, if you see that a lot of numbers of people are coming into the forefront, and that's why things are changing. That's why if you see, I also discussed the discourse of a language where chairman and chairperson, right? It was usually a chairman because society presumed that is always occupied by the men, not by the women. So that's why they kept it as a chairman, right? So language subjectivity I'm talking about. And it also gives a sense that how society thinks about a particular important positions. You got it? Let's go to the next slide, please. So in the next slide, I'm talking about the spectrum of gender identities, right? And one thing that I forgot to tell you that's also important is about identities, expressions, and experiences. What is this? It's about the kind of identities they have, different identities they have. Articulation is different, like expressions and experiences. What I mean by this, when you're looking at the notion of a gender, when you're thinking about the notion of the gender, and when you are engaging with this notion of a gender, what happens when you look the notion of a gender? Oh, two women of the same family have a different expression and experiences. Obviously, generally it's a cultural based. But sometimes, let's say, there are two sisters. One sister is globally exposed. She has exposure of a global, moving beyond from one place to another. She has learned the languages of the places and on forth. She has met people. For her experience and her expression is not going to be the same as the expression and experience of other places, of the same woman, right, of the other places. So think about this line that it is a spectrum that include a wide range of expressions, identities, and experience. All right. So when I will move to popular culture, media, and literature, and in fact, then I will be talking about in detail by giving you examples about the movies discussion, about literature's discussions, character discussions. I will do this all. You got this point? So that's a very important and significant to look into these things. Let's look at the next slide now. So in the next slide, when we see the spectrum of gender identities, beyond the traditional binary understanding of a gender, modern perspective acknowledges a broad spectrum of identities, including non-binary, gender queer, like look at this, agender, and gender fluid. These identities challenge the notion that gender is strictly tied to biological sex and instead emphasize individual experience, self-identification. Look at this. This is a very important point, right? The point is this, that modern perspective acknowledges a broad spectrum of identities, including non-binary, genderqueer, agender, and gender fluid. So these identities challenge the notion that gender is strictly tied. Like this is against speaking. They are more emphasizing on individual experience and self-identification. So the meaning of a gender is increasingly seen as a personal and self-determined, allowing people to define their gender identity based on their own experiences rather than on social expectations. You got my point? So what I'm trying to explain to you is this, that nowadays there is a shift that we are noticing, the shift that is occurring. The shift is not on sex, not on the biological sex. but it's more on individual experience and self-identification, right? There are n number of movies made, n number of discussion is already going on, where gender is based on the way a woman identifies herself or himself or themselves, I don't know, right? It's more about the experience, it's more about not the behavior that you're expecting, not the notion that is tied to their body, but it's more on experience that they have, cultural experiences, their own experiences. How do they look at their own body? How do they think what their bodies are about? Right? Let's say, for example, there is a different identity has emerged, which I'm going to talk, is about gay identity and lesbian identity, right? They do not identify as a male, they identify as a gay. It's separate. They want to identify themselves not as a male identity, but as a gay identity, as a lesbian identity, as homosexual, basically, I'm referring to. They don't follow the identity of being men or women. Right? They don't identify themselves as a male or as a female. They identify themselves as a, gay or lesbian or homosexuality, I'm basically talking about. How there are different identities which challenges that. It's all about I'm talking about how do you identify what you are. There's a movie in the series where there was a woman who identifies herself as a man, and there was a man who used to love wearing clothes of a woman and identifies herself as a woman. She loves dressing like women and wearing clothes, walking, talking, discussing, enjoying the company of women. So here the point I was talking about, the gender has a wide range of a spectrum that cannot be limited to one thing. All right, it's more about expression, articulations, experiences. Look at the next slide, please. So in the next slide, if you go, I am talking about the role of a gender in social power structures. So gender is deeply embedded in power dynamics and is a critical factor in shaping social hierarchies. Right? Gender is deeply embedded in power dynamics and is a critical factor in shaping social hierarchies. Historically, gender norms have been used to justify the unequal treatment of women. All right, gender norms have been used to justify equal treatment of women, LGBTQ plus. Right now we have just a second, please. LGBTIQ plus. Right, it may increase more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it go on. And others who do not conform to traditional gender roles. That's what I was talking to you. So this is evident in areas such as employment, politics, and even family structure, where patriarchal systems often place men in position of power, while marginalizing women and non-conforming individuals. Understanding gender as a power structures enable a critical analysis of how social inequalities are perpetuated through gender-based expectations, right? So, understanding gender as a power structure which enables a critical analysis of how social inequalities are perpetuated. So, one has to think about these as well, that how in terms of when we look at the politics, when we look at the employment, or in family structure, because of the patriarchal system, which places men in the position of power, marginalizes women and the people who fail to non-conform. So one has to understand gender is a power structure that enable a critical analysis of how social inequalities are perpetuated, right? So here we come, one of the important discussion that we have is all gender and performance. So this is a philosophy, Judith Butler's theory of a gender performative posits that gender is not something one is, but something one does. So it's a transformation from is to does. According to this view, gender is enacted through repeated performance of behavior that align with societal norms. such as how one dresses, how he speaks, interacts with others. So these performative actions become a way of reinforcing gender identities, and this perspective challenges essentialist ideas that link gender directly to biology and instead emphasize the role of a societal pressures and expectations in shaping our understanding of who we are. All right, so what I'm trying to explain to you what Butler does. Butler in her book called Gender Trouble, and there is another important book which people tend to not read, which is very significant book, Bodies That Matter. I would suggest you that you read Introduction of Bodies That Matter, right? And Gender Trouble, I mean, obviously I will be happy if you read the entire book, but if you find it difficult, so just read Introduction by Butler. Right, so what Butler is suggesting here is that your identity is determined not by the sex you belong to, right, but through the performances, through the act of performing. Like you perform certain acts. So you become that. So let's say, for example, women become women because they keep repeatedly perform a particular action, and that determines the agenda, right? So it is also same with the men, right? You are not born as a men and women. This is an essentialist idea that she tries to challenge as a post-structuralist thinker. She is trying to challenge the notion that one is not born men and women, but one rather becomes. It is what about does, not like what not Simon de Beauvoir was saying. I may not get into the Simon de Beauvoir because it will be more difficult for me to trace the journey from de Beauvoir to Butler. But rather what one does, if you keep doing what is expected from a woman, you will be assigned gender role of a women roles, right? And if you keep performing the role of a man, an action you keep doing, you will become men. Right? So it's more about what you do, not is about what something does, right? It is about enacting through repeated performances, repeated, not one time, not two times, not three times, repeated performance and behavior. And that obviously align, then obviously you belong to that gender. So which is what you say, like how you dress yourself, how you speak yourself, how you interact with others. These are the important ideas, right? Let's go to the next slide. In the next slide, I'm talking about now gender and disability, right? Which you have been waiting for to come, but that was important discussion for me to bring before you. All right. So the meaning of a gender is further complicated when viewed through the lens of disability. Gender expectations can be particularly restrictive for people with disabilities who may be subjected to stereotypes that reflect both their gender and their perceived physical or cognitive limitations, right? Look at this idea. That gender expectations can be particularly restrictive. They are subjected to stereotype that reflect both their gender and their perceived physical or cognitive limitations. The intersection of a gender and disability creates a unique barrier, right? This intersection of this gender and disability, such as societal norms about gender roles, such as femininity or masculinity, often do not accommodate those who do not fit neatly into these norms due to their disabilities. Right? Understanding gender as a fluid and socially constructed is crucial for acknowledging the experiences of disabled individuals who often challenge traditional gender boundaries in ways that expose the limitation of a binary gender framework. All right. So what I'm trying to explain to you, what I'm trying to make you understand is that how disability poses a new challenge for people with disabilities, right? What it poses a new challenge for people with disabilities. Since for women with disabilities, they are not going to be in the both. Obviously, for the repeated performance they may do, but it's not easy. because they have their own way of working, their way of action, expectations of there are generally this only binary way of thinking we have in society, men or female. They don't have expectations from intersex, gay, lesbian, or less a disability. For people with disability, they only think they have to just be in the closet. All right? So for them, it's not accurate to perform those roles, and obviously, since they are disabled people, their performance would not be aligning. They will not be aligning with either male or female. So where will you put them? What are the challenges they face? All right, we'll talk about it. Let's go to the next slide. That is a concluding slide for us. So the meaning of a gender is multifaceted and is influenced by a combination of biological and social and personal factors. It's both a personal identity and a social construct that influence an individual's position in society, right? Meaning of it is multifaceted and influenced by combination of biological, social and personal. It is a personal identity and social construct that influence on individuals' position in society, the opportunities they are afforded, and the ways they interact with others. So a deeper understanding of gender that incorporates both its fluidity and its a social implication that can help create more inclusive environment. So for all individuals, including those who experience the intersections of gender and disability. All right. So to conclude my lecture, I would say that there is a new dimensions associated in relation to people with disabilities. There is new ways to think about when it comes to women with disabilities. Right? They pose a different challenge to the normative societies which only think in binary terms, male and female, men and women genders, right? Roles. So we'll open up more discussion around this in upcoming schedules, in upcoming lectures, in upcoming discussions. But with this, I would like to tell you that please read Butler's idea of Bodies That Matter, the book that I have suggested you, and Gender Trouble. That's a very influential book, right? So read the introductory part at least. That will be helpful for us to shape our views further when I will proceed in the next discussion. All right? So thank you so much for your patience listening to me. Take care. We'll meet you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you so much once again.